Hello there, and thanks for watching. This is a video I thought and hoped that I would never have to make, but unfortunately I'm afraid I have to. One of my all-time atheist heroes, Alex O'Connor, has fallen. He no longer is a clear proponent of atheism, but instead he more and more seems to be arguing against atheistic arguments. For the past 2 years I've seen a gradual change in the way Alex reasons about atheism and religion. But one of his latest videos very clearly marks his departure from atheism. The video I'm talking about is called Atheist Slogans You Should Stop Using. Yes, that's really the title of the video. He now degraded atheist arguments to slogans and tells us to stop using them. Among the arguments that no longer carry the approval of Alex are claims are not evidence, which is kind of true. Your location determines your religion, which is also kind of true. And there is no evidence for God, which is pretty much true. According to Alex, we apparently should abandon these positions. That is at least what the title of his video and much of the content of his video are suggesting. Alex's video has a staggering length of about 3 hours. And for now, I cannot get into all of that. So I have decided to analyze one specific section of his video, which is the chapter in which Alex and Princeton PhD student in philosophy Joe Schmidt discuss the statement, "There is no evidence for God." Let's listen to Alex and Joe.
Hey, I'm going on a tour of the United Kingdom. The tour dates are on screen, the link to buy tickets is in the description, and I hope to see you there.
Well, this is how Alex opens almost all of his videos these days. Apparently, Alex is making money by going on tour, selling thousands of tickets for £30 each. And of course it would be a shame if his tour would fail because he would only sell half the tickets. So from a commercial point of view, it makes sense for Alex to prioritize income over principles, to take a bit of a blurry position on religion, so that he also sells tickets to the religious crowd in the UK. Just speculating here, of course. Maybe, again, just speculating here, Alex is thinking of a tour in the USA, because that is where the real money is. If that were to be the case, we can expect to see Alex moving away from atheism even more the coming year, so that he can 10x his ticket sales. Just an idea, just speculating here. But let's keep that speculation in mind. We'll get back to it later in the video.
I don't believe in God. I think you don't believe in God, at least the last time I checked you didn't.
Oh, nice. So everything starts fine and dandy. Alex presenting himself and Joe as being atheists because if you don't believe in the existence of gods, you are an atheist. But what's going to happen is that in this video, Alex is gradually going to slide from presenting himself as an atheist to being critical towards atheistic arguments, even misrepresenting them, to something that looks like he is blatantly promoting theistic arguments. And I think Joe does about the same thing.
I think it's a good segue into our second and perhaps more interesting claim, which is this. There is no evidence for God. There is no evidence for God. As Hitchens says, religion provides nothing. People say this all the time. Like when you ask people online, like, why are you an atheist? What's your evidence for atheism? They say it's not really like that. It's more that there's no evidence for the thing that you're claiming. Do you think that's true?
Well, you weren't asking me, but since I'm sitting behind a microphone as well, yeah, that's basically true. The supposed evidence and arguments that theists have been presenting us for the past thousands of years in order to prove the existence of any God are all meaningless nonsense that proves nothing other than that bad arguments exist. The things they call evidence consist of such poor and useless material that I don't think it deserves the label evidence. It's just stuff they say. Most of it, if not all their supposed evidence and arguments, have been debunked the crap out 1,000 times here on YouTube by many, many atheists, including yourself, Alex.
What's your evidence for atheism? They say it's not really like that. It's more that there's no evidence for the thing that you're claiming. Do you think that's true?
No. So, what is evidence? Evidence, at least as lots of philosophers understand it, is some piece of information that raises the probability of a hypothesis.
Something that raises the probability of a hypothesis, okay? For now, I will consider that to be a fair assessment of what evidence is. But of course, it very much depends on how you apply this principle. The point is, if you commit to this definition of evidence, you also commit yourself to probability calculations of some sort. Yes, probability is a game of numbers. It's math. If I claim that the probability of A is bigger than the probability of B, I somehow need to produce the result of some sort of probability calculation that demonstrates that the odds of A are now bigger than the odds of B. If I do not produce some sort of probability calculation, then I basically failed to demonstrate my claim. The problem here is that the vast majority of theistic arguments and supposed evidence does not succeed in doing this or even tries to. So if you choose this route of evidence is something that raises the probability of something, which I'm basically fine with, you do dismiss the vast majority of all theistic arguments and supposed evidence even before we start contemplating this idea. But please continue.
Evidence is information that raises the probability of a hypothesis.
Okay, so, but I wonder, like, is there a counterexample to this that would seem a little sort of weird? Like, I mean, if I said, I've got this hypothesis that there have been alien abductions, and if there had been alien abductions, then, I don't know, maybe there would be some geopolitical influence, like the government would start focusing on that and things would start going badly elsewhere. And look, like, the government is shutting down or whatever, and therefore I've got this evidence of alien abductions. In theory, that evidence is kind of predicted on my hypothesis, and that evidence is, forthcoming, but it would seem a little bit too loose to say that that counts as evidence for alien abductions.
Why not? I mean, it's just weak evidence, right? And it's evidence that's significantly overcome by countervailing evidence, right? So I don't know. I don't really feel the intuitive pull of saying that that's no evidence whatsoever, because after all, I mean, the hypothesis is boosted by it.
So just to be clear, Joe Schmidt, a Princeton PhD student in philosophy, is stating here that a government shutting down is evidence for alien abduction. He admits it's very bad evidence. Nonetheless, he is prepared to label this as evidence. I don't know if his education also includes media psychology, but know that as of now, for years to come, especially after Joe will have obtained his PhD, alien abduction folks will say there is evidence for alien abduction, according to Princeton PhD Joe Schmidt. So, nice. But to elaborate a bit more on this approach of what evidence supposedly is, imagine my hypothesis, and I think we're using the word hypothesis rather loosely here, but to stick to that wording, imagine my hypothesis is that vampires exist and they want to create chaos so that they can take over society. Is then a government shutdown also evidence for the existence of vampires? Yeah, it's just bad evidence, but still it's evidence. Really? Is that how you suppose that science should look at evidence? Because that seems rather problematic. How about my hypothesis being the opposite of yours? Aliens do not exist. They are not visiting us, because if they were able to reach us in the first place, they would be much more intelligent and capable than we are. So they would not have to bother with nonsense like shutting down a government. They would just zap us into oblivion by pushing a button. So in that hypothesis, as long as governments are shutting down, we can be pretty sure that we're not visited by aliens. So if we then would label a government shutdown as evidence, it turns out to be evidence for both aliens visiting us and aliens not visiting us at the same time. Again, a rather problematic situation that arises from the way Joe is dealing with evidence here. And whatever happened to probability? How did you determine or calculate that your hypothesis got more likely in any way? You haven't shown any of that, so no. I think Joe is far too generous in labeling stuff as evidence. I think we should raise the bar much, much higher before labeling stuff that people say as evidence.
I mean, listen, there are kind of philosophical challenges to this. I recognize that. But I would just want to diffuse those intuitions by saying, I'm not saying it's conclusive evidence. I'm not saying it's evidence sufficient to believe the claim in question or the hypothesis in question. I'm only saying that it is at least some potentially weak evidence in favor of the hypothesis. It's at least some reason to think that the hypothesis is true. Maybe it's an overwhelmingly weak reason. Maybe it only boosts the probability of the hypothesis from 1 in a trillion to 1 in a billion.
Well, that's the first case in this video in which Joe mentions a number, a probability number in this video, and it's rather odd. In this example, the odds have increased from 1 in a trillion to 1 in a billion. Joe just increased the probability by a magnitude 1000. I don't think that is what he aimed for. But this is just an example, of course, and not an actual calculation. But it kind of shows that probability calculation is paramount if you want to claim that something is more or less probable than something else. And again, the vast majority of arguments for the existence of God doesn't even attempt this, and therefore can basically be dismissed as evidence according to Joe's own definition of evidence. Now, up to now, this video may have looked as a reasonable and nuanced exchange of ideas, some of those ideas perhaps a bit naive, but so far we can't really accuse Alex or Joe leaning towards the theistic side. But as they are closing in on drawing a conclusion regarding this topic, that is all going to change. Listen to this.
Like, I really have come across people who are like, no evidence. And, it's like that video, no pomegranates. And they just keep on screaming, no. I don't want to see it anywhere. So I think some people really are like that. In fact, many people. But the more reasonable people will grant that, maybe there's like, slight evidence or weak evidence. But no sufficient evidence or no evidence to compel belief or something like that.
That certainly was not the strongest part of Joe's explanation, making people whose position it is that there is no evidence for the existence of gods look like whining and yelling kids, and then a follow-up that looks like a no true Scotsman fallacy. Anyone who disagrees is not reasonable. Not a very glamorous move.
I think that there's non-trivial evidence. There's substantive evidence to make theism a live possibility to people. I certainly don't claim that. Oh, goodness. Wow, where to start? Well, I mean, we could talk about, fine tuning. We could talk about contingency arguments. We could talk about arguments from consciousness. It just turns out that
you're talking about the typical sort of arguments for God's existence,
right?
Count as evidence.
This is a unique sighting. Two self-proclaimed atheists, summing up all these wonderful theistic arguments, giving those arguments credit. So, what are we doing here?
I've sometimes said that my favorite argument for the existence of God is the argument for God's existence from the number of arguments for God's existence. Because it's like everywhere you look, you can construct an argument from consciousness, contingency, design, like an argument from beauty, an argument from physics and the
reason, language,
reason, like all of that. So it is kind of crazy. And I think, it is rash to dismiss that evidence. But I think a lot of the time when people say there's no evidence, what they mean is there's no compelling evidence that has convinced them.
Alex, I think this sounds pretty silly. First of all, you know that your words will be torn out of context by Christian apologists for years to come, because you now talk exactly like a Christian apologist would do. Oh, my favorite argument for the existence of God is this. There are so many arguments. Let me count them. Let us have a future Princeton PhD throw in some more. And furthermore, really, your favorite argument for the existence of God is that Christian apologists bother us with so many of those arguments. Alex, about all of their arguments are crap. Their arguments demonstrate nothing, their arguments prove nothing, their claims cannot be tested or calculated or verified in any way. Guess what? If you put crap upon more crap, you don't get strawberry cake, you just get a pile of crap. Stacking extremely bad arguments upon more extremely bad arguments does never get you to a situation where you can say, oh, I've now collected so much nonsense that I think it will become true. No, of course. Alex, does your line of reasoning also apply to the existence of vampires, for example? Your favorite argument for the existence of vampires must be the argument for vampires' existence from the number of arguments for vampires' existence. I mean, everywhere you look there is evidence. There is the evidence of mysterious bleedings. There is the existence of blood banks. There is bats. There is testimonies of people who saw vampires. There is testimonies of people who are vampires. There is Vlad, Dracula being an actual historical figure. There is the argument from hiddenness. Vampires don't want to be seen, so the fact that we don't observe them is consistent with their existence, etc., etc. I mean, all of that, it's kind of crazy. It might not be compelling to some people, but it would be rash to dismiss all of that evidence. Get the point, Alex?
But having said that, with something like fine-tuning, when we've got like a bit of a stalemate, all of the constants of the universe, the strength of gravity and stuff, they're so finely balanced that it can't be down to chance. In saying that, fine-tuning is evidence for God, the instant response from an atheist, I think reasonably, is to say, no, there are lots of other explanations for this. There could be a multiverse, there could be some necessary reason for the constant.
And of course, fine-tuning rubbish again. No, Alex, there is no stalemate. I think the atheistic response to the fine-tuning argument could, or perhaps should be, that the whole idea of fine-tuning is circular reasoning. It's nonsense. You first need to presuppose the existence of a God so that you can rule out chance as an explanation, so that you can conclude we now only have two options. Either a God did it or there is some kind of necessity, which leads to your supposed stalemate. However, the physical constants of the universe can actually be explained by chance. You, however, automatically dismiss chance as an explanation. Most people who dismiss chance as an explanation for this supposed fine-tuning treat their chance assessment as if we were there when the physical constants were about to get their values, and we made a prediction about it. Well, of course, it would be very remarkable if that prediction then would become true. But that's not what we're dealing with here. We were not there when the values of the physical constants were set. We're just confronted with the outcome of these physical constants, and that current outcome had the exact same odds as any other outcome. So, no matter the outcome, any outcome would always have an astronomically small probability, which makes every outcome equally likely, and therefore every outcome can be perfectly explained by chance, which totally undermines the entire idea of the fine-tuning argument. The fine-tuning argument is basically comparable to finding 10 dice that were already rolled and now show something like 2, 4, 6, 1, 6, 4, 5, 2, 2, 1. And then you say, oh, the odds of that specific outcome were 1 in 60 million, so we can dismiss chance as an explanation. Oh no, theists and some others then say, we should compare this to 10 dice all rolling a 6 at the same time. Oh really? Why would these 10 sixes be so special? Rolling 10 sixes is only special if we presuppose the existence of someone who assigned value to throwing all these sixes before rolling the dice. That's the only scenario in which 10 sixes would be more special than any other random outcome. By analogy, life-permitting physical constants are only special compared to any other outcome of physical constants if we presuppose the existence of someone who assigned value to life before the physical constants of the universe got their values. In other words, this argument first needs to presuppose the existence of a God in order to prove the existence of a God. And if we do not presuppose the existence of a God, then life is not more or less special than any other outcome, which means that any random outcome of physical constants is equally likely and equally special, which makes chance an excellent explanation, which destroys the idea of fine-tuning. Alex, the fine-tuning argument is circular. I think not enough people are talking about this, and too many people, like yourself, Alex, are repeating the statement that the current physical constants cannot be explained by chance, while they can be perfectly explained by chance, unless you presuppose the existence of a God. So please stop dealing with this fine-tuning thing as if it's some kind of compelling argument. It's not.
That God is a good explanation, but it is worth pointing out, like you say, it should be holistic, in the same sense that, like, if you were like driving with your wife and you crashed your car and you said, like, I think that like the brakes stopped working, and I said, yeah, but it could also be that your wife is like trying to kill you. You're like, okay, look, in this circumstance, it seems far more likely that the brakes just stopped working. That could be true. But then if, like, as well as that, you got food poisoning after your wife had cooked you a meal, And again, in that circumstance, it's like it's way more likely that something went wrong, some of the food was off, than that your wife was trying to kill you. But then, like later that night, you get locked outside of your house in the freezing cold and nearly freeze to death. And again, it's sort of like in any individual instance, if it was just the one of them, you would say this extraordinary hypothesis that your wife is trying to kill you is like the worst option. But when you've got all of these different evidences which at least sort of seem consistent with this more extraordinary like idea, when they sort of all get put together, they sort of cumulatively give you better reason to believe that your wife is trying to kill you, or by analogy, that God exists.
Alex, what are you even doing here? What a horrible plea, and what a ridiculous analogy that is. Come on now, do I need to spell out the elephant in the room? Alex, in your analogy, the man, his wife, and their car all demonstrably exist. Gods don't demonstrably exist. That is the whole problem. I can say there is morality, so a God did it. I can say there are these remarkable coincidences, so a God did it. I can say there are beautiful flowers, so a God did it. And all these supposed arguments amount to nothing as long as I cannot demonstrate this God to exist. The claim that a God did it has the exact same credibility as Merlin the Wizard or Dracula did it. If you want to try to shed some light on all these silly arguments for the existence of a God, of someone trying to kill this man in his car, then use a being who's not proven to exist, for example, Spider-Man. So if this man is sitting in his car and suddenly his brakes are not working, it could be the case that Spider-Man wants to kill him. But I say, no, it's just coincidental malfunctioning of his car. But then he comes home and his food contained some dangerous bacteria. So then it could be that Spider-Man tries to kill him. And I say, nah, they probably just left the food in the fridge for a few days too long. Now, what do you think is more credible? My explanation of coincidences, or Spider-Man did it? That would be an honest analogy.
Then the third thing and final thing that I wanted to say was that we should also keep in mind that we want to take a holistic approach to the evidence. So even if for any particular piece of evidence, you can find some alternative hypothesis which would explain it, maybe even would explain it slightly better than theism. It may still be the case that theism offers the best, most elegant, most unifying explanation of a broad diversity of data, like fine-tuning, consciousness, the existence of moral agents, psychophysical harmony, the fact that there's a contingent universe at all, various things like that.
I think maybe a lot of people just underestimate the strength of this great tradition of natural theology and some of the arguments that it has at its helm.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you there.
It really goes on and on. Alex O'Connor and Joe Schmidt just summing up all these silly Christian arguments that prove nothing, creating an atmosphere of validation, while ignoring the fact that all these arguments they mention have been utterly debunked 1,000,000 times, especially by Alex himself. So let's wrap this up and return to my speculation part from the beginning of my video. I speculated that perhaps now Alex is touring in the UK. Maybe he is eyeing a European tour or an American tour, and he wants to sell a bunch of tickets, and continuing his usual atheistic stance on the universe could significantly limit his ticket sales, and therefore he is slowly but surely moving towards a pretty much blurry stance on religious matters. Let's call that my hypothesis. Alex, if you are prepared to host a conversation in your video that labels the shutdown of governments as evidence, albeit bad evidence, but evidence for alien abductions, would you then accept you seemingly starting to validate all kinds of theistic arguments as evidence for my hypothesis? And with that question, I will conclude this video. Thanks for watching.